In 1948, more than 700,000 men, women, and children lost their homes. Over 400 villages were wiped from the map. For those who lived it, it was called the Nakba, Arabic for the catastrophe. For decades, the West barely spoke about it. For many, it was a blank page in the history books, or a story told only in whispers. But the Nakba is not just an event of the past, it shaped the Middle East as we know it. It's the origin of one of the world's most intractable conflicts, and it's a story that deserves to be told fully, with all its complexity and human cost. To understand the Nakba, we have to go back, way back. Before 1948, before the British, before the partition plans, before the headlines. Palestine in the late 19th century was part of the Ottoman Empire. Its people were overwhelmingly Arab, mostly Muslim, with significant Christian and Jewish minorities living in cities, villages, and rural farmland. Economically, Palestine was agrarian, but connected to the wider region through trade. Olive oil, citrus, soap from Nablus, and wheat flowed through its ports. Communities were tight-knit, family-based, and bound by centuries of local traditions. That world changed dramatically during World War I. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1917, British forces captured Jerusalem. That same year, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, a letter pledging support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while also stating that nothing should prejudice the rights of existing non-Jewish communities. But the way Britain administered Palestine, under the League of Nations mandate from 1920 onward, would set the stage for mounting tension. Jewish immigration, driven first by European Zionist aspirations and then by the desperate flight from rising anti-Semitism and Nazi persecution, surged in the 1920s and 1930s. In 1917, Jews made up roughly 10% of Palestine's population. By 1947, they were about 1/3. Many Palestinian Arabs feared and increasingly experienced land dispossession as land was purchased for new Jewish settlements. The British often struggled, and sometimes failed, to balance the competing nationalist movements. By the mid-1930s, tensions erupted into open revolt. The Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939 was a mass uprising against British rule and Zionist immigration. Britain responded with heavy military force, demolishing homes, arresting thousands, and executing rebel leaders. The revolt was crushed, but the anger it represented didn't disappear. It simmered. World War II and the Holocaust brought unprecedented urgency to the question of Jewish statehood. In 1947, exhausted by decades of unrest, Britain handed the problem to the newly formed United Nations. On November 29, 1947, the UN voted on Resolution 181, the Partition Plan. It proposed dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem under international administration. The Jewish Agency accepted the plan, seeing it as a step toward independence, despite not receiving all the territory they had hoped for. The Arab Higher Committee rejected it, arguing it violated the rights of the Arab majority, who still owned most of the land. The map itself was deeply contentious. Jews were allocated 55% of the territory, despite owning less than 7% of the land at the time. The Arab state would have been split into three disconnected regions. Within hours of the UN vote, violence erupted. This was the Civil War phase of the conflict, from late 1947 until May 1948, while the British were still technically in charge, but already withdrawing. Attacks, reprisals, and counter-reprisals escalated between Jewish and Arab militias. In this period, the first major waves of Palestinian displacement began. Some fleeing the violence, others expelled from their homes. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the independence of the State of Israel. The next day, armies from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded, marking the start of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. By this time, however, large-scale displacement was already well underway. Between December 1947 and May 1948, at least 250,000 Palestinians had fled or been expelled. One of the most debated aspects of this period is Plan Dalet, or Plan D, a Haganah military strategy implemented in April 1948. Historians disagree on its intent. Was it primarily a defensive plan to secure territory, or did it amount to a blueprint for expelling Arabs from the proposed Jewish state? What's undeniable is that in the months following Plan D's launch, numerous towns and villages were emptied, some after fierce battles, others after residents fled in fear of impending attack. In cities like Haifa and Jaffa, once vibrant, mixed communities, the fighting and psychological warfare campaigns drove tens of thousands to flee. Some left temporarily, expecting to return once the fighting ended, but many never would. The village of Deir Yassin, near Jerusalem, became infamous after April 9, 1948, when over 100 villagers were killed by Irgun and Lehi forces in what they claimed was a military operation. News of the massacre, widely reported and in some cases exaggerated, spread panic, prompting flight from surrounding areas. In July 1948, the towns of Lida and Ramle were captured in Operation Dani. Israeli troops ordered tens of thousands of residents to leave in the sweltering heat. Many died of exhaustion and thirst on the march east. By the war's end in early 1949, more than 700,000 Palestinians had become refugees out of a pre-war Arab population of around 1.9 million. Over 400 villages were depopulated. Some were razed, others were repopulated by Jewish immigrants. Many were renamed. Maps were redrawn. In Israel's first years, committees systematically replaced Arabic place names with Hebrew ones. Forests were planted over ruins, and entire communities were erased from the landscape. Displaced Palestinians scattered across the West Bank, then under Jordanian rule. The Gaza Strip, administered by Egypt and neighboring Arab states like Lebanon and Syria. Most ended up in refugee camps, tents giving way to cinder-block shelters over decades. In December 1949, the United Nations established UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, to provide education, healthcare, and emergency aid to the refugees. UN Resolution 194, passed in December 1948, stated that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so, and that compensation should be paid to those who choose not to return. Israel rejected large-scale return, arguing it would threaten the state's Jewish majority and security. In much of the West, the Nakba barely registered for decades. The Cold War alliances and the framing of Israel as a democratic ally meant Palestinian displacement was often overlooked or minimized in mainstream narratives. In Israel, discussion of 1948 was long shaped by the official line that most Palestinians fled on orders from Arab leaders, a claim historians now widely dispute as a blanket explanation. In the 1980s and 90s, Israeli new historians like Benny Morris and Avi Shlaim began re-examining declassified archives. Their work confirmed that while some Palestinians fled voluntarily, many were expelled through direct military action, fear, or deliberate psychological operations. Today, the descendants of 1948 refugees number in the millions. In Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the wider diaspora. In Gaza, over 70% of the population are registered refugees. Every year on May 15th, Palestinians mark Nakba Day, often with protests, marches, and commemorations to keep the memory alive. The Nakba's legacy runs through every peace negotiation, every flare-up of violence, every debate about land and rights. For Palestinians, it's not just history, it's a living wound. Why revisit something that happened over 75 years ago? Because understanding the Nakba is essential to understanding why the conflict endures and why trust is so hard to build. It's a reminder that wars don't end when the guns fall silent. For those displaced, the loss of home and homeland can echo for generations. History is not only what's written in books, it's what's remembered in families, passed down in stories and silences. And it remains one of the defining events of our time. To talk about peace, we have to talk about the past, fully, honestly, and without fear. Discuss in the comments, and if you learned something, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more history.